If it's in the news, it's on moral side of the news. Thanks for stopping by and joining us. I'm John Blim with the WHAS Crusade for Children. With me, as always, is a distinguished panel. Reverend Sally McClain, Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. Reverend Clay Calloway, West Louisville Ministers Coalition. Reverend Jason Crosby, Center College. And Father Bill Hammer, St. Margaret Mary and St. William Catholic Churches. We begin today with grim news from Maine. As we tape this show Thursday afternoon, the manhunt continues for the gunman who used an assault weapon to kill more than a dozen and injure dozens more. Panel, it's a horrifying story we've heard and seen before, including reports that the assailant had mental health issues. Let's hear your thoughts and your concerns about Maine and these shootings.
Well, sad it's a story of rinse and repeat. It appears to be another iteration of that. The one thing I remember about Lewiston, Maine, believe it or not, is that Muhammad Ali beat Sonny Liston for the second time in Lewiston, Maine. That famous pose where he's standing over top of Sonny Liston, that photo was taken in Lewiston, Maine. That's the only thing I remember of note in Lewiston, Maine. Sad to say that this is another infamous moment from Lewiston, Maine. Again, you know, assault weapons. Now they have a confirmed case of mental illness connected with it. It's just a sad case of rinse and repeat. And that's all I want to say at this point.
Yeah, I'm thinking the last couple of years, I mean, some of us panelists, none of us are on every week. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you're on periodically, and this is at least the third, if not the fourth time that it's been a topic for us to discuss. And the ease with which people can get these weapons of mass destruction. That's what they are. It's a weapon of mass destruction. And how easy people can get them, and somehow others argue, oh, our country's so much safer because everybody can have these in their yard, or they can have these in their closet, they can have these wherever they want them. We're supposed to be all so much safer, and I don't feel safer. And we have an example again of how the ease of access and the ability to even have these produced available to anybody, you know, within over 18 years old, and anybody who an 18-year-old buy and give it to somebody else, it doesn't bode well for us. And the unwillingness to try to put some reasonable limits upon these type of firearms means we're going to be doing this again and again and again. Again, we talk about the offering of, you know, prayers and thoughts, but that doesn't change the future, at least as it's projecting itself right now. And that I find so discouraging, so discouraging.
And often I hear, it's not the weapon,
right.
It's the person. That's what you hear over and over again. Well, we knew this person had a history. And something that was brought up last night that I really didn't research was they have what they call a yellow flag law in Maine. Are you familiar with that? Any of you familiar with that? So that if a person has a mental illness, a known mental illness, someone can, mental health expert can go and talk them out of their weapon or take away their weapon or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but Maine is the only state that has a yellow flag law.
Well, and Sally, to your point about the person, I saw someone iterate, okay, even if we grant that it's not the gun, it's the person, what are we doing putting these guns, like AR-15, semi-automatic weapons of war and mass destruction in the hands of persons who have a track record established of mental health issues. And it's, as Father Hammer said, yet another occasion when we gather and we are mourning and grieving, still collecting information about various factors, of course, that were involved. But unfortunately, it doesn't take too long once certain bits of information come our way for us to be able to kind of get a sense as to various factors involved. And certainly one in this instance was mental health struggles. He was hospitalized just this summer and yet still had possession of this weapon. The fact that there are images of the shooter walking into the bowling alley without any sort of face covering. You could clearly see cargo pants that appear to have objects in them, perhaps magazines to reload, a tactical vest that perhaps contained additional ammunition. Just that sight in and of itself is one that is very unsettling, especially when, once again, we know that there are very simple common sense measures that can be taken, in particular in an instance like this where mental health is a factor, where we can mitigate against the possibility of something like this happening.
And even as you say, as often as reported, it's not the gun, it's the person. But the fact is that a person with mental health issues cannot kill on this scale if all they're using is a single firing rifle that's going after, or something you might use when hunting animals, or if you have even a pistol that you got to continue to reload. You can't fire off those kind of arms except with this particular kind of gun. So it is not just a person, it is the weapon. That if a person with a mental illness has access to a knife, I don't think that he would have killed these kind of numbers with just a knife. And all that as well too. And so you go through that kind of process, and it is creating, that look at again, we're going through the whole system right now with regard to protecting our schools, and protecting our churches. The number of people who now have to have, armed people stationed as guards, and just in regular everyday life, you encounter them now, and.
This is somebody who was tactically trained too.
Yes.
So he
Trainer.
knows
Yeah.
exactly what he's doing. They're not even sure how much he has expertise of being able to hide out because they think that might be a possibility. But one of the things I heard that I thought was kind of interesting is this will make no sense to anybody else but this one particular person. Only he will have the rationale as to why he has done this, and it will make sense to him, but not to anybody else.
Well, what makes even less sense is that we have discussed this issue far more than any state or national legislators have. So we continue to debate it and discuss it more than they do, and they're the ones that are obligated by Constitution to regulate against and with firearms and militias. That's the sadder state, I think. So to say it's not the guns, not the guns, it's the person, but it's not the guns, it's the regulators. It's not the guns, it's the legislators. That's my spec, because they have relaxed the regulations since 92, I believe it was, when they rescinded the ban on assault weapons. And there was a decided dip when the regulation was in place, and a clear spike when they were removed. So there's a correlation between regulation and the escalation of gun violence with this type of weapon.
But how terrifying for the people of Maine, a relatively small state, mostly rural, and a manhunt continues when we tape this program nearly 24 hours after he's done what he's done. I mean, to be locked in place in your home, that just must be awful and terrifying for the whole population of the state.
Well, it completely unnecessary. But again, in addition to the direct impact felt by those who are grieving the death of a loved one today, no situation of this magnitude or that resembles this affects just those individuals that are present or who lose a loved one. It affects communities. It has ripple effects that I don't think we can fully comprehend when it comes to the traumatization that people absorb. One other manifestation that is a long way from Lewiston, Maine, that's a long way from Portland, Maine, from Bangor, is what happens in Jefferson County and in schools all throughout the Commonwealth of Kentucky as young children, kindergartners, are going through active shooter drills on a regular basis. And the fact that we seemingly are unwilling, not seemingly, we clearly are unwilling to shield our children from even having to go through that exercise that lingers with them, that communicates something to future generations about their significance, about their safety, about what the adults around them value.
So it'll leave permanent marks with
It
them
leaves
through their
marks.
life.
And it creates
Absolutely.
a kind of a twisted normalcy. You know, I remember back in the 60s a program called The Munsters. Remember The Munsters?
Sure.
And the irony was that the Munsters were the normal ones. And their niece, who was a very attractive young lady, she was the one that was abnormal. So being a Munster and being a monster, so to speak, has become a metaphor for, we're just used to it. We're used to the extreme abnormality of this extreme violence that we live with day in, day out, week in, week out. So that is where we are. And until there is a coming to grips with the reality, the root of it, then it's going to be more of the same. We'll just have to just schedule on the calendar. You don't win, but you know that through the course of a month or every 2 months, you're going to be talking about this topic on this broadcast.
And also,
One-
too,
yeah.
I was going to say also, too, the impact it has in our normal life. I'm not a bowler. I know how to bowl, and I occasionally do that with some friends, something like that, but I'm not in a league. But can you imagine today, any bowling league that's going on, what they're going through as they gather with their friends? Same thing happens after something happens in a school, or something happens, in a shopping center, or wherever it may be. Every time you go into that experience, you're in the back of your head thinking, could this happen here? Could this be my experience? Is this what's going to happen next? And that's something we are all living with. I'm sorry, Sally.
My
Yeah.
thinking is that we're all trained in grief.
Yes.
And so when they say the clergy are going to be there and the health professionals are going to be there, when you're dealing with this kind of unexpected death, when this unexpected tragedy, that affects us as clergy because we've been there. We know what that's like, and we know how hard that is on families. And as you say, the community and broader even than that. So my heart goes out to those professionals who are also going to be dealing with it.
So before we move on to the second topic, just a quick poll among you four. When you go into public places, do you think twice now and look around and say, I need to just be aware of my surroundings?
Well, that's obvious. I mean, you're much more conscious and much more aware. Just because you're paranoid don't mean somebody's not after you. So there's a reason to be vigilant, and we're told to be vigilant. And we need to be more vigilant. Anytime like the shooting that happened at Kroger, a named Bush out there killed a lady and a woman out there in J-Town. He was going to a church first, a black church first. Couldn't get in the church. He, as an alternative, he went to the Kroger right there in J-Town and shot people point blank. Now somebody else had a gun in the store, but they didn't. They drew it, but they didn't fire at the perpetrator. So you have cases like that could happen anywhere at any time. And I say often, if you got guns everywhere, you can have murders anywhere at any time. And that's just the reality of it all.
Our son, who was in the military, said, pay attention. If something doesn't look right, pay attention.
One of the more disturbing phone calls that I've ever received took place last spring when my wife was at the corner of Preston and Main Street. And she said, I think I am in the midst of an active shooter situation. And John, to your question, is it something that I have thought about regularly for years and years? Of course, movie theater, any sort of public space. Certainly, in my capacity as a pastor, it was almost a thought that crossed my mind every single Sunday when I entered into that space where doors were unlocked and folks could enter. On that particular occasion, I did not think or anticipate or had not thought until that point in time that if you are driving in your car, that would be an environment in which you would need to do that calculation. I don't think that way anymore. And so it's almost ubiquitous at this point. You don't necessarily have to be in a crowded environment for it to be something that is running through the back of your head. I know it is mine.
To reply on the question, I haven't found myself changing where I go or what I do. It's that I'm still, it's like I'm not afraid to go to a bowling alley if somebody called me today. But what I do find, and is in the point you just made, Jason, that I'm much more sensitive to road rage happening than I ever have been. I mean, road rage has always been part of driving. You know, I've been driving for over 50 years. So, but I've never been concerned about violence directed at me. I always was, you know, yeah, I'm going to horn. Maybe someone's going to, you know, cut me off, you know, get around me, whatever, do that. But to be mindful that it could be a gun at any time now, any time it could be a gun. That is something that I'm mindful of now that I'm reading more about it and aware of more about it. So.
All right, panel, we're going to move on to our second topic here on Moral Side of the News. Moving on to Washington and the chaotic battle for the gavel and the Speaker in the House of Representatives, that is. After weeks of failed votes, a new Speaker is in place. He is Louisiana Republican Mike Johnson, a supporter of Donald Trump. There are major issues on the table, including aid to Israel and Ukraine. Meantime, some worry about whether this new Speaker, whom experts say played an instrumental role in the effort to overturn the 2020 election, could he try to influence the 2024 presidential election? We'll turn to our panel on Moral Side of the News. What do you hope happens from here, panel?
I'm amazed. When you say supporter of Donald Trump, I want to take it a step beyond that. He was a supporter of denying the election results. He was one of the front runners to denying the election results. Did everything he could to obstruct the fair and deliberate approval of those results in the Senate. So that's who this is. So he was against the will of the people. That's who has been selected as the Speaker of the House. They call it the People's House, but those actions, for the record, was his decision and actions that was in direct opposition to the will of the people. That's the huge contradiction, dichotomy of it all, for me. And this is the one who was elected unanimously. Even after the long food fight to get to this point, he was selected unanimously. And I'm told by many who are insiders that this guy is much more formidable. I mean, he's the latest version of a figgy pudding brand of politics. He's more affable, he's more congenial, but his policies are much more formidable and much more deliberate and much more predictable. So I'm, in terms of hopefulness, I mean, I have zero in terms of any good that can come from this speakership, any good that can come from the people's business being conducted as a result of this decision.
Isn't it called a wolf in sheep's clothing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have.
Does that ring a bell?
I've got a figurine of that in my house. So permanently placed in my house is a wolf in sheep's clothing to remind me of that, of the environment. In other words, there was reference in the Bible, of course, but that appears to be what this is.
Well, it's not lost upon me that in the duration of time that the House of Representatives has lacked a speaker, that the war in Palestine and Israel has broken out, that the war continues in the Ukraine. The point I'm trying to make is that the lack of leadership and inability to select a speaker, which just bear in mind, if we go back to January, in January of this year when Kevin McCarthy was eventually selected, it took 15 rounds for him to be chosen in that capacity. It had been 100 years since a speaker was not selected on the first vote, okay? And now here we are just 10 months later, in some respects back to square one with this particular body that holds the majority in that House. My ultimate point is that the lack of leadership, the lack of willingness to govern and legislate, to address issues, common sense issues that polls indicate that the vast majority of Americans support, such as common sense gun legislation. We can't get to that, and people are dying in Lewiston, Maine because of the ineffectiveness of those that are currently in a position in the House of Representatives responsible for electing a leader. One other point I would add, and that is a source of concern that I think is significant and worth putting on people's radar screens, especially that might be watching this show, is watch the language that the speaker uses. In the way in which the political agenda that is advanced under Representative Johnson's leadership is explicitly couched in Christian terminology.
Absolutely.
Last,
I mean, it's dripping in.
last night, when he offered an acceptance speech on the floor of the House, he invoked God as known by some Christians on multiple occasions, including referring to the fact that it was God that had ordained his ascent into his position of authority. If you operate according to a theological perspective such as that you are in some respect God's ordained, guess what you can do? You can undermine the will of the people. And that kind of theology, what I would describe as white Christian nationalism, is the kind of theology that is intertwined with politics that says, you know what, the ends of putting in place certain individuals with certain agendas supersedes operating as a democracy. Pay attention to it.
Part of one of my thoughts as going through this process of the last several weeks, but last 10 months or so, is that we're going through a period in our national governmental experience where it's no longer a two-party system, it's actually a three-party system. And that happens in a lot of countries around the world, where you have to form coalition governments, which often involve having to try to create, artificial unity, which always will fall apart. Now, we've also had this in our country, too, in the past. I remember growing up, there was a group called the Dixiecrats. The Democratic Party was very split, among its members as to those who had been viewed today using language that we use, centrist, and those who are kind of more extreme. And I would say the same thing is happening right now in the Republican Party. But there are many Republicans who are very concerned and being, centrist or whatever it may be, the language we want to use to describe it, looking to serve. But there is a wing within that. And that is a controlling wing right now, as can oftentimes happen in, coalition governments, because it can fall apart also. And I hope that if some of the potential for extremism does come forward and is not checked and balanced, that again this coalition will fall apart, as it did. I mean, that's why we got in this situation, because the previous coalition fell apart. But a lot of democracies don't work under that two-party system, and there's also lots of complications that come along with that. So maybe my concern is that, we're going to put our national unity as a forefront kind of principle, and again, principle of dialogue, not monologues back at each other, those kind of things where we are willing, when it's appropriate, to find ways that we can still reach a common good, even though it may not be what I define as the best, but a common good. So we'll see.
Hakeem Jeffries, I think, was saying something like that,
Oh.
and coming up, because I was really impressed with the speeches that he's given. And he's saying America has always found a way to come through, to come through the toughest of times. So if there is a hope, I'm going to hope in his words, and that he will be able, somehow we will be able to come up with a balance
Yeah, we managed that in spite of ourselves, though.
in spite of ourselves.
I mean, so that's called.
We all do that in spite of ourselves.
In spite of ourselves, it's called grace. But I couldn't help but to hear what you said. You made reference to 15 rounds. That's assault weapon language that with McCartney. I mean, I didn't miss that. It took 15 rounds. And that's the closest they came to addressing anything that's even remotely like addressing assault weapons and the rounds it took to elect McCartney. That just shows you where they are in the most basic decisions. It's going to be so bizarre and so off the rails and beyond the pale. How can they govern with any modicum of wholesomeness or benefit or good with that kind of contention within their own ranks? Again, they agreed on this decision, which is the most scary of all. They probably found someone who's willing to do whatever, and but I think that it's a sad state of affairs where we are, and I just look into the heavens for where cometh our help.
Bill, to your point about the way in which relatively small, roughly 20 members of the right-leaning Freedom Caucus have, in many respects, dictated how this year has gone for the House of Representatives. But it is also illustrative in that when you have a faction or segment, even if they are relatively small, but the margins that the GOP has in the House is not large to begin with. It's only a couple handfuls of seats in the House. But when you have a faction that will not govern, that are ideologues, that are fundamentalists, be it religious or political, and if there's any sort of compromise or conversation with Democrats, then everything falls apart. That's also untenable, and it is not serving the American public well.
Well, it comes also again to the experience we have even in our congregations sometimes. There are groups of sects there, but even in families, sometimes one or two people will misdirect, incorrectly direct a whole family, and so it is important to view this again. We're all in this together. Somebody else said that once, but we're all in this together. Seriously, we are, and we better work and act that way. Yeah.
All right, we've got a minute left from Director Will. Just told me in my ear. I want to finish with this. Southern Living magazine, known as a charming town when it sees one. Bellevue, Kentucky gets the top spot of a list of charming towns in the bluegrass. Here's some other ones. LaGrange, number 9. Bardstown, 8. Berea, 6. Danville, 4. And Winchester, number 2. Panel, you ready for a road trip? Let's go.
Family roots in Winchester, so that's interesting
Yes.
to know. But people are moving back to smaller towns. Lexington is a growing city. Many people are migrating there from larger metropolises. So the charm of small towns is really taken hold.
Well, and I would just have one bone of contention with this Southern Living list as one who is regularly in Danville and Louisville in my capacity as chaplain at Center College. Undoubtedly, Danville should be number 1.
And you get the last word on that, Jason Crosby. Thank you, Sally McClain, Clay Calloway, Jason Crosby, and Father Bill Hammer. You can catch this program again anytime on YouTube. Just go there and search for Moral Side of the News. Until next week, we'll be here again with more conversation. So long for now.